just get you on the screen with me. 1 sec. All right, there you are. Good. All right. No dilly-dally. We've got business to do tonight. We've got to get through some Horton, right?
That's correct. Correct on Monday.
Right. We are doing chapter 1. Yes, we've done it already. If you're wondering why we're being all brisk and weird, because stupid technology, stupid. And we've actually done half of this already, and then it bailed on us, and then setup took forever, and it's just like, dude, I'm so over it. Anyway, so it's sheer love driving me on now, right? Love for the text, love for the people. Got to feed them with some
love
theology.
For me, Mike. Love for me. Do you have any love for me?
Sort of was dimming on that love a while back. Dimming, fading to black, just like my intro screen.
You got to teach me some of your cool tricks on Zoom one day. You know, all this stuff that you do, all this magic.
Yeah, all this amazing, like, not happening magic. Oh my goodness! First I must master it, then I can teach others. Speaking of masters, have you seen Lee Irons on the show recently?
I have seen Lee Irons on the show recently. Great, really enjoyed it. Yeah,
everything is it's just going up a notch, because, like, at the end of the day, Lee might be watching this right now. And if that is the case, that just puts on the pressure.
I think he's doing really well. I think you know, you're definitely excited to do a show with him. I can tell that much.
Oh,
you're very
excited. I mean, he's like my hero, bro. He's just like,
you were trying hard not to be too exuberant, but
to get his digital signature. I was just like, oh, please, can I just get you to sign something?
It's like, would it be weird, Lee, if I had your face tattooed on my chest near my heart? Would that be weird? I'm okay with it if you're okay with it. You were excited. No, it was good. I really enjoyed it, actually. I listened to the second one this morning while I was doing the shopping, and I think maybe that was a bad idea. I think maybe I needed to give more undivided attention.
Dude,
to that
it's Lee Irons. You do not want to be shopping. You want to be sitting down with a pencil and a paper, and you want to be taking
But when you run out of toilet paper in the Corona crisis, you got to go.
You got to go.
You just got to go get that toilet paper.
Fair
there was no toilet paper, but still. Yeah.
That's when you use the paper that you were going to take notes on.
That's it. Yeah. You just got to crumple it up. Just your notebook paper. You just crumple it up a bit. Get it all soft.
Slightly, yeah. All right, so anyways, this is not out of 10 for efficiency so far. Let's keep going, right? Okay, so last time, what we're going to do is we're eventually going to take these things and we're going to put it on a playlist and get nice and organized, or on the podcast, we'll tag them, we'll keep them in a group, and this is just entry level. Welcome if you're joining us. Great to have you with us. We just refer back to the previous Why Study Pilgrim Theology to get why we're doing this. We just want to enter in with some basic sort of paradigms and definitions, broadly making use of Mike Horton's text on, his Pilgrim Theology, which is the abridgment of his systematic, or not abridgment, kind of a rewrite, and it's really good. So you should get that, and it's a great sort of accompaniment for the stuff we talk about anyway on the podcast. So just to put it in a slightly more systematic format is good. Really, in chapter 1 of his systematic, he starts off with a great question. How do we know God? Essentially, is the big question that needs answering. Obviously, in that. You come right into all the madness in the Christian world, and we've got a million different answers for that. A lot of it is just straight up wrong and misleading and not good. And really, this is at the end of the day why we study theology. We want to know God. We want to know what it means to know God. We want to know what it means to be known by God. So, if our theology is not helping us at that basic level, what are we doing? And it gets surprisingly technical right up front. On that point. So I think, he goes into faith and reason. We kind of slammed that around last time in the last recording. Don't know if you have any thoughts you want to kick off.
Well, I just think it's really important just to understand, and I know that this is one of sort of those pet peeves of Horton, but I think it really is a very, very important point for us to take hold of in today's society, because everyone in today's culture, because everyone is looking for is working in this basic dichotomy of faith versus science, or faith versus fact, or and I think it's just really, and Christians have helped that along in some ways. Don't worry about it, you just have to have faith, as if as if faith is something that you have in contrast to evidence or facts or reason or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes, obviously, where faith is going to stretch us beyond our reasoning, beyond our understanding, but it's not a contradiction to it. And so for him, just, putting down that faith is based on the evidence that is there for us to examine. So take the resurrection, for example. We're not being asked to believe that Jesus is Lord just because 2,000 years ago there was a man who said so. It's more than that. He performed miracles and he rose from the dead, and it's on the basis of the evidence that is there for us to examine that we are to believe. And it's not necessarily that faith, arises from that evidence or from the examination of evidence, but that's the way that God has articulated or revealed himself, is that here's the evidence, believe on that basis. So I think it's just really important for us to take hold of. Otherwise, we just get lost in it. But I was thinking, there's a lot of difficult concepts or complicated ideas that come up in this question of okay, well, what evidence then do you examine? How do you move on? Okay, if I want to have faith that is based on how God has revealed himself to me, but how does that happen? I was thinking of an illustration that kind of ties in some of these concepts that we're about to go through together. And it's like this. Imagine, and I think this is not mine, by the way. This comes from somewhere, but I have no idea where.
Okay.
But imagine we woke up in a room together, and the room had no doors, or the door was locked or whatever, and we had no memory of how we got into the room. We just knew that we were in the room. We knew nothing about ourselves, nothing about our past. We had no memory, nothing. We were just, rational beings, people in a room together.
This and then you Plato's begin to cave.
A little bit like Plato's cave, okay. But it's kind of I don't want to go Plato's cave because it might not be the same thing.
All right.
I don't want to irritate any hardcore Plato's cave people, so I'm just doing my own thing here. loosely based on some philosophical ideas, which may or may not have come from Plato.
Now you're gonna tick them off. They're gonna hate you. There's no way you're getting out of this one. All right, go.
So the whole thing is
basement.
Yeah. It's not a cave. Right. And we're trying to work out what's going on while we're there.
And can shadows.
We know? can we? Look, I did frame this discussion by saying it's not mine. I did not think this up. Okay.
It was like this unknown philosopher known as Plato. I mean, you might have heard of him.
And anyway, so you're in this room and you're trying to work out what is outside the room. Is there anything outside the room? And you've got various tools at your disposal, and you can either look at things inside the room and see if there's anything in there that might tell you about the nature of things outside of the room. Or you might sort of use mysticism or intuition or magic or whatever to try and divine what's outside of the room. Or you can just simply give up and say there is nothing outside of the room. And in some ways, a lot of what we're going to be talking about with these distinctions are ways in which, how can we, as people inside of the room, the cave, whatever, discover what is outside of the room? How can we know? So somebody comes along and says, "Oh, yeah, I'm a Christian because I believe, I believe that there is a God. He's outside the room. He's outside the world, but." I believe in this, and you start to examine that. Well, how do you actually begin to examine a claim like that? And I think I don't know if that helps or it doesn't help, but I thought it was a helpful framework. I think
you should just go all the way to the world of the forms. You should just bring it all in there. And
I don't want to do that. No, I just want to be in my room with you, thinking about what's outside the room. I don't want to go in any caves. I don't think about forms and essences.
I mean, that would be helpful if you wanted to make us Platonists, but it's not helpful if you don't want to make us Platonists.
No, it's going to do that.
No, well, actually, you know what he does say? Plato was kind of, he's very kind on Plato, right? He, this is not helping in terms of just building from the ground up. But
can't you just accept my illustration? Say, do you know what, Andre, that is helpful, and let's move on that basis.
Well, it's in the actual text. Let's talk about it. A revived Platonism was also important in the first century. Platonists believed that the transcendent one could not have created the material world, since it represents a falling away from divine perfection. So the world was instead created by... My iPad froze. A semi-divine workman, or demiurge.
Yeah, anyway. So that's the kind of idea that the room is bad.
Right. The good life.
To escape the room.
And yeah, so you want to get out of the room by philosophy, essentially. And that's the whole thing for him, the ascent of the soul. So tying it into where the soul goes, I mean, he's like, well, everyone is basically trying to get out of the room via some sort of ascent. They're all, maybe we've jumped a few guns here, but let's say they are already convinced there is God or beyond the room, and that's, well, no, we've mixed metaphors. I'm going to abandon your Plato's cave basement thing.
No, it works. It works because everyone's trying to get out of the room. Everyone's trying to get out of the room.
We're going to create confusing.
You're either trying to get out of the room by.
We're going to create confusing mixed metaphors. That is going to be like the anti-instruction. We're we're doing the anti-didaskalos thing here, bro. We're just killing it. You get the anti-Christ and you get the anti-teachers, right? We are fulfilling the role.
Man.
All right.
Yeah, it's because you went there. You made it all about Plato. I wasn't going there. I was just in my own thing, loosely based on ideas of the past.
All right, listen. Here's what we're saying.
Forget that. Yeah.
Here's what we're saying. I can't hear my microphone. It's just amateur hour over here. If basically you've got everyone's coming at this thing via some sort of bent, right? We've got, and so he starts off saying, I mean, you mentioned the faith and reason thing, and I think that's good in that, typically the atheist thing is, oh, well, how do you know God? Well, how do you even know there is a God? And, it's faith versus reason. And he uses the illustration of the scales, it's either or. And, he really just cuts that right down and says, that's just not how it works. Everyone's coming at it from a certain presupposition. Really, and to a large degree, anyone who's critiquing those who are just kind of going on a whim and jettisoning reason, that's a fair critique, because that's a bad thing if you're doing that. No, Christianity is not calling you to know God by just simply jumping into this blind chasm and just going into the whole thing without any knowledge at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And Christianity, and this is, I think, the baseline for it all, especially as he ends off with the gospel. Christianity is just it's not like any other religion in the world. It's basically, and he talks about Paul just dealing with the Epicureans and the Stoics, and the whole thing there is just that Paul's coming at this thing with a completely unimaginable concept for both Stoics and Epicureans, which is helpful because he shows that really what you have there is a kind of a contrast with all the kind of stuff that we would face today with the new atheists and the spiritualists and the various approaches to religion and faith. And he's basically saying, the very approach that Paul took when he was speaking at Mars Hill is what we need to be aware of going into this question of how we can even have faith, how we can know God, how we can know that He exists, or that we officially know Him. And so, there is every reason to sort of dwell on what Horton was talking about over there. But then coming back to your point in terms of just, in all seriousness, how is it then that we do find, if we're saying that reason is not to be jettisoned in this process of trying to find out what's outside the room, if God even exists, then how is it possible that we do find God? What is our claim in that regard? Why is it so reasonable? What was Paul saying that went against all the Greek philosophers of the day?
So yeah, because I think that understanding that what the Greek philosophers of the day were doing was really helpful to understand basically how all thought has always happened. and essentially there's nothing new under the sun. You've always got certain number of options. And so, I think the way he was talking about the Stoics, which are basically like mystics, little pantheists, and they see God in everything. God is totally immanent and knowable, and you can, it was all through like a kind of new agey, I guess, is the way, you can relate it very much to that sort of idea. That, like, obviously you can know God, you've just got to, look around you and just like be one with nature, man, and stuff like that. And that's so it's almost making it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Epicureans, or the Epicureans. How you meant to say it?
The correct way.
Okay. So the Epicureans, who are a little bit like the new atheists today, and they're saying, look, no, it's impossible to know God. All you've got is, the facts and all that kind of stuff. Goes beyond that. And if there is a God, the Epicureans weren't atheists, but they would say that the gods were totally detached from the world. So the world is operating independently of the intervention of the gods, which functionally is the same as being an atheist, or it's, I guess, deism, but it's the same as being an atheist at a functional level.
If God is there, we can't find him anywhere, so he's irrelevant, which is what most atheists would say there. Yeah, so you got the new ages and new atheists. I like the way you put that. Represented all the way back in Paul's day. And all right, so what's Paul saying? What is the difference between their message?
So I really like the point that basically they're both wrong, in the sense that the kind of new atheists, or the Epicureans, they have too low a view of God's transcendence. So God is even more unknowable than what the Epicureans would think, or even what the atheists would think, because they would think that if God were there and he were to be known, we could get there through our examination of the facts and through our use of reason. And then, but equally, the Stoics are wrong, the New Ages are wrong, because they have too low a view of God's immanence, in the sense that they don't understand just how intimately God has revealed himself and made himself known. So the problem with both of them is that they miss the idea of the necessity of God's self-disclosure or self-revelation. So, if if you're thinking you can somehow build this little ladder up to God using science and reason and facts, you have no idea how high that ladder is, and also that none of your ladders can even get there. And so, it's impossible to actually get there, which we'll get onto in a moment. The unless God reveals himself, you can't build your ladder up to him. And unless so the kids are running, it's lockdown, what can I do? What do you want me to do? So
do you want to get your kid to do the rest of it, bro? Might as well.
She'd love it. Yeah. Anyway,
all right.
The idea is that it misses God's revelation. For the Stoic who's looking to nature and everything around him, the only thing, it's almost like they're missing out on the way God has truly revealed himself, and so they're looking to all the wrong things to know him, and are making it harder than it is. But then to the Epicureans, or to the new atheists, they're making it seem like it's easier than it in fact is. So the bottom line is, for both of those two groups, we need God to reveal himself, otherwise we cannot know him. But God has revealed himself, and so we can know him even more intimately than we think.
Yeah, that's good. And you were talking about the ladder there, and I think Horton raises two good points in that, as you mentioned, it's not even possible to build a ladder high enough, in that he speaks of the reality of, well, firstly, if you could, you wouldn't want to, because to stand before God, to have climbed up before God without a mediator, is hell, not heaven. And that's a big point that he makes again and again. But you can't anyway, and so it's necessary for God to come down. But it is just a helpful way to think about all the religions of the world, all the efforts, whether it's via speculative reasoning, whether it's via philosophy or religion or moralism. Everyone's trying to climb that ladder to God in some way, and it's a helpful way to just categorize the various worldviews out there. But the whole problem then is just, if God is so infinitely other and ontologically different from there's a creator and a creature, how is it even possible that we know God? How are we even to receive true information? How is that gap supposed to be bridged, even in terms of communication? And Horton goes into a lot of detail here, talking about univocal, equivocal, actually, and analogical knowledge, which I think is helpful. But the more I think about it, it is probably not necessary up front. If we're just building this thing from the ground up, it might just throw in a lot of big words for no reason. But I think
I think one way that is maybe useful to just float, although we don't need to get into massive detail about it, is that so Horton has these key distinctions which I think are quite helpful, and we've been talking about the transcendence immanence difference. So God is transcendent, unknowable. God is immanent. He's revealed himself, and everyone deals with that transcendence immanence tension or distinction in different ways, whether you're on the new age or new atheist side, and they both get it wrong. We need revelation. That's how you handle that. But then, that other distinction that you were referring to there of the, was it the qualitative, quantitative distinction? Is that that's not what you had in mind?
No. Not at all. Not even close.
I thought you were. I thought you were talking about the infinite chasm. That's the
problem right there. That's why the ladder can't ever reach, etc. God is not just simply quantitatively different from the creature. He's qualitatively, ontologically different. But what you're saying there is that he must come to, the way that is overcome is not that we can get to God. He comes to us. He reveals himself to us. But then the question, the next thing you're dealing with is, well, how do we even understand? How is it possible for us to even, is it true that we know univocally what God knows? In other words, what he says to us, we know in the same way that he knows. Or is he so far from us that we know equivocally, in that, we just know something completely different? It's not even really the same thing. And both of those have real problems to them. But Aquinas was the big guy who came along and said, we have analogical knowledge in that. And I like what Horton has here as an illustration, actually. He says, by exclaiming, "Your mother roared," your mother roared at you. No one is suggesting that your mom is a lion. That would be using roared univocally. Not that there is no similarity between the mother's manner of speaking and the lion's native tongue. That would be an equivocal sort of, like you're just saying they don't even have any bearing to one another. Rather, there's an analogy there, right? It's a analogical sort of approach where you're saying it's not the same thing, but it has its correspondence. So that's basically the way that we're able to understand revelation. We understand it through this analogical approach.
I think, just to help people see that it sounds like a lot of academic, philosophical, intellectual language that really is just like, come on, just leave it alone. But really, it's necessary if you're thinking rightly about who God is as he's revealed in Scripture. So if you have a right view of transcendence, of the transcendent God, which you must have, but also a right view of immanence, and you understand that the transcendence of God is not only quantitative, which is that there's an infinite gap between us and God, but it's more than that. It's qualitative. That actually it's not even the same thing. So you imagine your ladder, and your ladder would have to keep going up infinitely in order to reach God. But then when you realize that God isn't only different or transcendent above us in extent or degree, but in a totally different, he's in a totally different
realm
thing.
Yeah.
Like it's a different ballpark, different ball game altogether. And so your ladder's going up infinitely, but it's going to the wrong place infinitely.
Exactly.
And you realize that you can't go through our limited resources into God. You can't enter heaven that way.
Yeah, it's almost like two problems. You don't have an infinite ladder to begin with, but then even if you did, like it would only take you to the wrong infinite destination, which wouldn't even start to get you onto the right track, So
and even if you could, through some arcane magic, get the ladder to go to God, you would end up in hell because you're a sinner in the presence of a holy God for all eternity. So either way, it's just not happening. But that necessarily asks the question, well, hang on a second. If God is so transcendent, if he's so much other than us and so much better than us and higher than us, and his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, how on earth is it that he's able to communicate anything to us at all? And you begin to wonder then, is all of the Bible just, well, it's not actually the truth about God.
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean?
Well, that's where the philosophical debate goes, and even with, and it's all prepping us for understanding Jesus' own ministry, and even just, I suppose the equivalent would be the Gnostic idea that really it's impossible that Jesus would be physically incarnate. God could not be physically incarnate, and he's too holy other, he's too, transcendent, he's too spiritual. The reality is you would reject the incarnation on that basis. And it's a similar sort of thing in that you're going, well, and much liberalism does this. And there's a lot of philosophy that will really major in on this where we couldn't actually understand God if we tried anyway. So we just got to work with, this, make our own thing up essentially. And it's likewise with the other side of it, where you start thinking about process theology and, we understand God perfectly. And actually we're bringing God down to the creature level to make that happen. Yeah. So both of those end up in real problems. Yeah. So we are like abbreviating, and Horton's abbreviating, and you can really spend a long time tracing through the history of thought, showing how this is a real deal. Yeah. Yeah.
But a bottom line to that, and I think it makes total sense, is that you realize, I think, it's that idea that we know truly, but we don't know completely, or we don't know absolutely. So that, we can talk about God's goodness, truly, and we have a framework for understanding that. We can talk about God as Father, and it's true. It's true that God is Father because he's revealed himself that way. Not in the sense that we're tapping into the very essence of God, but in the sense of this is how God has wanted to make himself known to us. And we can understand that by way of analogy.
And that's where his essence and energies thing comes in as well. We know God in his energies, not his essence. And that's another helpful way to approach the subject.
Yeah, what was that great thing you mentioned it before about Kelvin? What was his quote about this?
Kelvin. Well, I know one of the quotes. I don't know if he mentions it in this chapter, but I know Kelvin's all about the God speaking in baby language. Just accommodating to us so I like that, because when you speak to your kid in baby language, you're speaking truly. It's not like it's a lie, as you accommodate and go, daddy loves you and whatnot. It's true. It's just not as complete as you could make it if you were dealing with perhaps an adult or something. So even that analogy fails in that we're not only different from God by way of age, but, we get the idea. Yeah,
exactly. So how does general and special revelation fit into this?
So God reveals himself to us in, if we're in the room and, Horton says the way we meet God is it's the stranger that comes to meet us, essentially. How does he put it? Meeting a stranger. Where everyone else is trying to overcome estrangement, we realize we can't do that. God comes to us. He introduces himself to us, and he does that through general and special revelation. This is fairly standard stuff in theology, in that God has revealed in creation, in conscience, and typically what that would reveal to us is the law. We'll understand the holiness of God, his power, his as Paul talks about in Romans 1:18, just his invisible qualities, as it were, just as we look out at creation, none are with excuse in that regard. And then all of this is, it's connecting with what God himself has put inside of us, not only in terms of this, as Kelvin said, the sense of the divinity, but even in terms of the morality that God has placed within our hearts, this ethical imaging, this reality of the moral law written on our hearts. We know what right from wrong is. We know that we do wrong, not right. And so this is all certainly an awareness of God. God is communicating. God's doing that. It's not us, but it's usually law. And then, of course...
so that's what we talk about when we talk about natural law, isn't it?
It's
that totally. natural sense of the law.
Yeah, I think so.
In conscience, in creation.
Yeah, exactly. So what can be deduced just from, you got a whole lot of different understandings of it, but yeah, certainly we would think about it that way. And then, of course, in terms of the way that, we're not going to ever have any knowledge of the Trinity, as we know. We're not going to have any knowledge of any saving grace in light of the fall. We're just going to know something's wrong. We're going to know that we're doing wrong. We're going to have a sense of judgment. But God must reveal. No one's going to understand the gospel. That's going to come by God's special revelation, and initially all the way through.
And isn't it interesting that if you look at the religions of the world, nobody has deduced the gospel?
No, and everyone's deduced law. Everyone's got a ladder approach. They've all got you climb up to God, you ascend, either you got to go live in the mountain and pray for, 30 days, or you've got to go, you've got to philosophize your way out of it, or you've got to just do good, do as best you can.
I think it's a really powerful argument, actually, for the gospel as being salvation by the pure monergistic grace of God, because it is God alone who saves, and he saves by his grace, because that is the one thing no religion has thought of, because you wouldn't ever think of that. It's like it makes no sense to us in our kind of natural law way of thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's huge. And not only that it's a good idea, but that it bears out in history with Jesus. And that's an amazing thing as well, in that you've got two elements there. I don't know if you know that famous story where, I don't even know if this is true, but I hope it was.
Is it based on Plato?
No, it's based on C.S. Lewis.
Oh, okay.
See, I know my sources. I'm willing to, to be upfront about that. Right. So you walk into the staff room. You can imagine sort of C.S. Lewis, with all his staff buddies there at where did he teach again? I can't remember now. Was Oxford or?
Yeah, Oxford, I think.
Yeah. And so you can imagine what that would be like, right? The staff meetings, all the Oxford dons there, and just going for it, and they're debating religion. And the chalkboard is filled with all these religions, and in walks C.S. Lewis, and they stop him in his tracks. Obviously just want to get a coffee or something, but stop him in his tracks. Say, "Well, you're a Christian, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." Tell us what's so unique about Christianity. What's the thing that makes Christianity, what it is? And so he walks up, rubs all the stuff out, and in the middle, he writes the word grace. And really, that encapsulates right there what you've just said, in that everything, one way or another, has a work system. It's all law-based. It's all you do this to get to God, which comes from something. It comes from what man did in the garden and the arrangement that he was under, and that very law that was written on his heart, that eternity placed on his heart. That's why every sense of the divine carries with it this kind of baggage of law and legalism. And grace is counterintuitive at the core. It's the very opposite of what man was wired to do at that level. And now, the message that Christ would have done it for us so that we receive it freely is just, but then that brings into the other point that makes Christianity completely unique, and he does major on this in the chapter, which I really appreciate, because this was a big point for me coming into Christianity, in that there is no other religion in the world that's based on datable facts outside of yourself in history, and if that falls, it all falls. It's all just a good idea. A religion is either a good idea or a vision someone had or something someone said. It's never based on historical datable facts. And even just, I know we automatically go to the resurrection, and we should. And you've got so much there, and he goes through all the classic sort of text, lists how it's you've got the external witnesses there. But one thing I've come to appreciate, and I really think he does talk about this in the passage, but I think it's just such a powerful point. You've got the actual witness of the New Testament documents themselves, which are, we read it as our Bible, and we're just so used to it. But that Bible couldn't exist if you actually have to think about this. Not only does it enjoy just unprecedented levels of authenticity in the ancient world, there's just nothing like it. It's just singular. But even beyond that point, even like just assuming that, you have this reality of the church that is being testified to, which just simply couldn't have happened unless Jesus had raised from the dead. No one would have done any of that. It's just, and even beyond, anything else you need to consider in the resurrection itself, the reality of the church, the reality of its documents, the reality of the preservation of the scripture. I mean, these things prove that something, they're really the best argument we have for what happened in history, whether you're a Christian or not, and everyone's got to deal with this. The best argument we have is that it happened based on all these things that are testifying to that reality. So it's so simple at some level. I feel like we want to look past it too much, but there it is, just smacking us in the face.
And it comes back to that discussion right at the beginning about faith and reason, faith and facts, and it's full circle, isn't it? So, you kind of start off, we're not saying that Christians know anything about God based on, reason, or based on philosophy, or based on mysticism. We're saying we know anything about God because it's based on revelation, but we are saying that revelation, which is necessary because of God's transcendence and immanence, because of we can only know things by way of analogy and all that kind of stuff we're talking about. We can only know anything like that if he reveals himself, but we do have that revelation available to examine. And I think that's the really unique thing. So that's why it's not just this scripture versus that scripture, or that, you get that whole thing. There's so many religions. How do you know which one's right?
Yeah.
Exactly. There's so many holy books. Which one is right? No, it's not quite as complicated as that, because you're just asking, which one of these has actually portrayed God entering into real time and space and telling us about himself? And
even that, I mean, you're just going, all right, well, let's I think intelligently dismiss anyone claiming to reveal God to us without any level of authenticity to back it up, and then ask what's left. And you only find one at the end of the day. So it's kind of, it's, you know what it's like. I love this. And he mentions this, something like this illustration in the book where, and it's like, God reveals himself in the gospel. So you hear the gospel preached, you can be saved as you believe. And there is a spiritual reality behind that. It's an objective reality. The real Holy Spirit is changing your real heart and really opening your eyes to truly see the glory of Christ. There's nothing that's not good enough about that. So, we want to be clear that it's like asking the blind man why, how he suddenly can see. He's just like, the vision itself is what testifies to the sight. So the reality is, that's at the core, and that's what God's going to do to those that he reveals himself to. But let's say that is like you, when you're a child, enjoying the warm rays of the sun, sitting on your porch, and you're going, Mom, what is the sun? What's that light in the sky? And your mom says, well, that's a star, and it's this is how it all works with the planetary thing and the solar system. Do you have to know all of that to believe and experience the sun in truth? Believe that it exists? No, of course not. But if the year is every different. This is every issue in the world right here, because if you did decide to go and check out what was going on with that solar system, that thing that your mom told you, and you found out actually there's nothing to show you that that's true, and there's nothing to account for this feeling that you've experienced, or I think you have every reason to worry about that. But if you just know that it's there and check it out, and it's not that you're depending on those facts to experience this reality, but it's verified. The faith is then verified as it moves beyond itself. So obviously you're in a whole realm now, and we could spend chapter after chapter dealing with the various approaches to this. He touches on some of those, but I think that's the nub of it.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's it's very, very helpful. Yeah. So I think that's in a nutshell. Like it's kind of an introduction just to the whole, how we can do theology, and why we need to have why we need revelation, but also why we can have confidence that God has revealed Himself. And I think certainly at this,
and on that, once we've established what He's revealed, know that we can believe it truly. If not fully, if not understand it fully, we believe it truly, and we can build doctrine on it. And I love what he ends up saying. This is sound theology has its source in the founding drama with its revealed doctrines, and then through that, it's going to lead to doxology and discipleship, which is, of course, the rest of the story. No longer as spectators, we're disciples on a pilgrimage to the everlasting city, which is really the journey, pilgrim theology on two-age sojourner.
Boom.
That's beautiful. So again, what we're trying to do here is just not really. We'll leave you to read the chapter by yourself. Not even trying to do it justice in that sense, but hopefully that's just you got to start there. You do have to start there. You have to touch base on that. This is why God's covenant, which is what we'll get into, becomes all important, because that's how He revealed Himself in the gospel. So it's all set up, and then of course we understand the incarnation and Christology all comes from that. But let's leave it there for tonight. That's a good
this morning.
It's a good hour.
This
afternoon tonight, and that's about an hour, I think. Well, I don't know. I've lost track. Anyways, all right, let's play out. Thank you.